totally self-taught on icons. I'm just a fan. I'm not really an expert. But I find the history of it in particular interesting. So we'll start about the year 230 and creep up almost to the present. This image is this is the baptistry, reconstructed. It's like taken out of the ruins they found in the desert and put in a museum. This is the baptistry of a little town called Dura Europos in Syria. And this was excavated in the 1920s. They found this. Now, the history, though, is about the year 250. Dura Europos was a little Roman garrison town. It was a walled city, and of course they had the soldiers were all in this one central place on the city wall. And then also going along the wall, around the circle, there were businesses and homes and so forth. Well, when the Persians attacked, the soldiers filled up the empty rooms beside their garrison with rubble and sand, just so it would make it harder for them to break through if the Persians were trying to burst through. And the Persians won, and they slaughtered everybody, and then they went away, and nothing else was ever built on top of Dura Europos. It just sat there, covered with sand, for just about 2 millennia. And in the 1920s, it was discovered, and it was dug out again. And it's startling how much it actually looks like a church today. You come to my church, which our icon program has just finished being painted last May. It'll be similar to this in terms of having paintings all over the walls. It's icon images all over the walls. Here at the lower right, we see the two of the 3 myrrh-bearing women bearing spices going to the tomb to anoint Jesus on Easter morning. The scene above that looks like it might be in a ship, but I'm not sure which one it is. Maybe that's the resurrection appearance on the shore of the lake. And in the arch, see, this would be the baptistry, but it shows the body of Christ lying on the slab there before being put in the tomb. So it's a pretty wonderful series of icons from an extremely early date, about 230. These are among the earliest icons that we have at all. And come on to the next one. Here's an image also from Dura Europos. This is the Naked Lady, as my grandchildren would say. The Naked Lady is Pharaoh's daughter who has found baby Moses in a basket, and she's rejoicing. And as is the tradition or the custom in icons today, is that the way it tells a sequential story is you see Moses twice. You see her finding him in the basket, and then she's handed him off to the servant woman here, and they're going to take the baby and wrap him up. The interesting thing about this image, though, is this is also, it's painted on a wall, but not in the church. This is from the synagogue at Dura Europos. At that time, where the Jewish people in Dura Europos worshipped, it was just like an Orthodox church, in that the walls were completely covered with icons, basically, with paintings conveying the truths of the scriptures. Here's another shot of the synagogue at Dura Europos. See the doorway there? If you come up and to the left a little bit, I wish I had a close-up of that. That's Abraham looking so patriarchal and so strong. These are really wonderful. These are very good paintings. And as a matter of fact, the synagogue painter was more talented than the Christian painter. There's better icons in the synagogue. But that kind of resolves a question that we have, which is, if the Jews were forbidden to use any images, why did Christians begin to use images? Apparently, outside of Jerusalem, outside of the Holy Land itself, it was perfectly all right to have paintings of Bible scenes on your walls. And think, too, about how illiterate most people were. Even if you were literate, you were unlikely to own a copy of the Bible. I mean, think about if there was no such thing as a printing press. If you wanted a copy of the Bible, you'd have to ask a calligrapher to make it for you. How expensive would that be? To have in front of you as a calligrapher, write down every word of the Bible. So that's why there was maybe only one Bible per church, and it was kept very carefully stored at the church, so that that was all right because most people didn't read. People would encounter the scriptures read aloud, and these images on the wall would remind them. If it's the middle of winter and you're thinking, who were the 3 guys that were at the Transfiguration last August? I don't remember. They could go over and look at the picture. They could remind themselves. So it's a kind of a picture Bible on the walls of the churches and in synagogues, apparently. Just about the same time, here's an image of the Good Shepherd. This is from the catacombs in Rome, the early 200s. there are many depictions in the catacombs of the Good Shepherd, and a question would be, is this a portrait of Christ, or is it a sort of symbolic image, like a little later in Christian art history, they might depict Christ as a lamb, behold the Lamb of God. Is this meant to look like Christ, or is this just symbolically representing him? Probably it is just a representation. It's not really intended to be a portrait of him. I have heard this, and you two experts will know better than I, that really the way that Christ is depicted varies a great deal until about the middle of the 6th century, when they all start looking like the Christ of Sinai. Middle of the 6th century, all of a sudden, it's the long hair, the beard, the eyes, hair's parted in the middle. All of that starts happening at the same time. Are you aware of that?
Two things.
Uh-huh.
One, Romans had the same image. So this was a pre-existent concept of the Good Shepherd that the Christians then took, like the peacock and the fish, that they're reoriented towards the Christian venue. And also there's a 4th century image within one of the catacombs, I can't recall which one right now, where Christ has the regular black hair. And,
oh, really?
Yeah. So
okay. So yeah. There is, it looks like Jesus.
Well, but I mean...
yeah.
Bearded?
Bearded,
yeah.
Bearded black hair, yes.
And there's also a lot of speculation that it comes from the Shroud of Turin or Veronica's Veil, whichever one, which maybe the image was a little more intense then than it is now, who knows. But if you look at it, I mean, the Sinai Christ really is almost identical to the Shroud.
This is, yeah, I read a book about this, and it sounds like a crackpot theory, but boy, the evidence that the Shroud of Turin corresponds historically to a cloth that was kept in Constantinople that was found in Edessa of Turkey about the year 550. Then all of a sudden, images of Christ always look like Jesus. It's all done in that pattern. This book pointed out that if you took transparency of the Christ of Sinai and placed it on top of the Christ of the Shroud, it would touch at 175 places. Yes,
I went down to visit the Benedictine monastery outside of Richmond, and a few years ago, at the time I went, they had a life-sized picture of the Shroud of Turin. If anybody's interested in going down there, call ahead to make sure they've got it. But it was quite beautiful, and you're right, it does look like Christ of Sinai.
It's very similar. And this book I read, what's it called? The Blood and the Shroud, I think was the name of the book. It pointed out that even little details like in the shroud, there's a little wrinkle that goes diagonally across the neck, and that between the eyes there's a little kind of letter U shape, or like an open box. Those are in the Christ of Sinai. There are many, many funny little things like that that are exactly the same. So the theory is that the shroud was kept folded up so you only saw the face. So that was why it was thought of as the holy napkin, the mandilion, the cloth that healed King Edgar of Edessa, or the cloth that Christ pressed to his face that was given to him by Saint Veronica. All these stories kind of come together. Pretty amazing stuff. So here is the, as I was saying, this is the Christ the Good Shepherd, and as Colette points out, this was already an image they had in the tombs and the catacombs. Many common images were repurposed or rethought in Christian terms. Another one from the catacombs, the 3 young men in the fiery furnace. Why would you see them? You know, what's this about? Why would that be in a burial place? It's because in the catacombs here, and here's Daniel in the lion's den, of course people would be taken there, if they were able to get hold of the relics of the saint, would be taken there after their martyrdom. And so when you were there and you were praying, maybe coming back every year to do a memorial service at the tomb of the saint, you would be reminded of the strength of the saints and the martyrs and the courage that they showed. Leonid Uspensky has a wonderful line in his book. He points out what's represented in the frescoes is not so much the very moment of sacrifice. It's like you don't see lions tearing up a Christian. What is depicted is the internal spiritual state of the person, that is the state of prayer. The Christian, who always had to be prepared to confess his faith through suffering, was provided with an internal attitude which he had to preserve at all times. That which could calm, strengthen, and teach was portrayed, and not that which could possibly repel or frighten. that internal attitude he has to preserve at all times, basically that to pray without ceasing. That's cultivating that ability to be tranquilly in the presence of God and in communion with God all the time. You needed to see that when you were down in the catacombs rather than some horrible scene. This touches later, of course, on the tendency in the West to begin to depict the crucifixion in more and more hideously graphic ways. Why did that never happen in the East? Why did we go on with images like this that show courage, that show strength, rather than depicting the suffering? There's probably some reasons for that. Another one from the catacombs. Here is a woman praying with her hands raised in prayer. We see often in the Psalms, I lift up my hands in your name. It's called the orans position, which is the Latin word for praying, orans. This might be the Virgin Mary. Sometimes we see images that are very clearly of the Virgin Mary. I don't think I have it in my slideshow, but it's a woman like this, and there's a child visible in a circle, in a disc, on her torso. So that's the version of the Virgin of the Sign. This is one of my favorite images from the catacombs. This is the Madonna and Child, the earliest example of a Madonna and Child image from the catacomb of Priscilla, about 250 AD. And this was such an early image that people wouldn't necessarily know what it meant. Seeing a mother holding a baby, we immediately think, it's the Theotokos and her child, but they wouldn't have thought that then. So helpfully the artist placed beside them a prophet who's pointing at a star. This may well be Balaam, who in Numbers 24, you remember Balak, the king of the Moab, asked Balaam to come and to curse the Israelites. And it's actually a funny story when you read it, because he keeps paying Balaam to come and do a really good curse this time, and really curse them. And Balaam always says, I have to say what the Lord gives me to say. I can't promise it'll be a curse. 3 times he blesses them, and Balak is tearing his hair out. Can't stand anymore. But the 3rd time, Balaam, here he is pointing at the star, he says, Numbers 24:17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forth out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. And the Orthodox tradition is that Balaam, having pronounced this prophecy, that it was passed down from generation to generation of the prophets of Moab, one to the next, telling this story. A star is going to come forth. So then, in the fullness of time, 3 kings, 3 magi see the star. That's the star that Balaam told us to watch for. That's the star we need to follow. So they follow the star all the way to Jerusalem and say to Herod, where is the child? Follow the star all the way to Christ. So it's lovely to think that Balaam was sort of their predecessor, making this prophecy so long before. Here is, this is, I believe, the earliest depiction of the crucifixion. And as you can see, it's a mockery, that Christ is depicted with a donkey head. This was found in the Palatine, the school on the Palatine Hill, which was where the ambassadors' sons and the emperor's sons and all those high-class boys went for school. And somebody just scribbled this on a wall. The writing says, Alexamenos worships his God. It's even a little bit misspelled, so it's like little boys, one boy making fun of another boy. And it's kind of sadly significant, I think, that the first depiction of Christ on his cross is one that mocks his sacrifice. That's the first offering, artistic offering the human race gives to depicting the crucifixion is this one.
What year?
That he came to suffer. This
What
is
year? What year?
Between 200 and 250. Oh. Between 200 and 250. It's called the Palatine Graffito because it's on the Palatine Hill. So when I was putting together this slideshow, I was thinking about early images. Like, man, I need to get the Palatine Graffito. So I Googled it. Google Images, Palatine Graffito, and the little ad next to it said Palatine graffiti removal. I don't want it removed, actually. Please don't remove it. This is the earliest, I understand, the earliest depiction of the face of Christ. This is from about 300. It was the floor of a Roman villa right outside of London. Discovered in 1963, where a farmer was plowing his field and suddenly there were mosaics down there. So I'll skip to the next. It's a part of this floor, if you see. It's like there's a big entryway and then a bigger room behind it, maybe a dining room. It's fantastic. This was in the floor, which does seem strange to us, because it would mean you're walking on the face of Christ. We would never do that today. But it was very common among the Romans to put the face of Hercules or Zeus or whoever on the floor like that. You just put mosaics and frescoes everywhere you could. They were totally surrounded with art all the time. And it raises, again, that thing we were talking about. When does Jesus start to look like Jesus? Because this looks nothing like our concept of Jesus. It looks more like Hercules with a huge neck and he's so strong. It's like, you know, is this the man you admire most? Of all the men that ever lived, you make him look like a superhero. So it's not our image of Jesus, but there's sort of sweetness about the impulse to make him look big and strong. Yes.
Isn't that also about the time that St. Patrick came of age in Ireland? And wouldn't that show the strength of the Christian community in England in the 300s?
There was already a very strong Christian community, mostly Roman soldiers. I don't think that the land of England had been evangelized very thoroughly at that point, but Romans were bringing it over. I guess the first martyr in Britain is Alban, right? And he was a Roman soldier. But 300 is late for Patrick. I think Patrick died around the end of the 600s, didn't he? Is that right? He was born maybe 650 and...
Frederica.
Yes.
Helen was born in England.
That's right, yeah. Constantine's mother, Helena, was born in Colchester, which means the caster, the army base at Colchester. And the story is that her father was Old King Cole. There really was a King Cole going back behind that rhyme. So she was the mother of Constantine, and it was in Colchester, I think, that Constantine was proclaimed emperor. York.
But then there's a story that he was born there. It isn't confirmed that he was born there. But she does have a church that she built there.
Yes,
and it is an Orthodox church now.
It's a wonderful church. If you go to Colchester, it's great because even on the city hall, there's Helena holding a cross. There's a wonderful church that was built in the corner of a Roman amphitheater. I think it's St. George.
That would never happen.
But anyway, it's an Orthodox church. St. Helena. Anyway, so here we are in London, and there's the big picture of that one again. This is another mosaic. This is from the apse above the altar at the monastery of St. Catherine on Mount Sinai. The Christ of Sinai we looked at a little bit ago is from the same monastery. Though it's a painting, this is actually a mosaic. And it's because of the way it's cropped, it's hard to tell how big it is, but it's very big. And it covers this whole architectural space with the altar underneath. You can see like the tops of some banners there. It gives you a little bit of something to compare it with. It's the Transfiguration. This would lead us to think that the monastery adopted St. Catherine as its patron around the 11th century, I think. Probably it was first called Monastery of the Transfiguration. Very appropriate, because there they are on Mount Sinai, out in the desert. You see Elijah and Moses on either side. Let's see. Yeah, I am left-right confused, so I just try to point, I'm not actually saying left and right. Elijah over here, Moses over there. Beneath them, John, Peter, and James, or Yaakov, on either side. An interesting thing that I learned about illiteracy and literacy, when a culture becomes literate, one of the first things they don't think about is plan ahead so you get all the letters on the same line. And you can see this is a place where like graphic design is not taking hold. You could have planned ahead, you get all the letters of Jacobos on a straight line, but instead it's like Johannes, it's just that letter S or the C is just falling down below because they didn't plan ahead. It's a wonderful icon. It's again, it's got a lot of power, got a very penetrating quality to it. And it was found and restored by the iconographer, what's his name? Kurt Weitzman. He went down there.
See himself in icon?
No, I'm sorry. He was an icon, a scholar and restorer. So he went down. He was sent down to study the icons at Mount Sinai in 1963. This icon is also from about 550, from the time the church was built, about the same time as the Christ of Sinai. So he went down there to study and catalog and list all the wonderful icons at Mount Sinai. And he and his partner built a scaffolding, climbed up to the very top to examine this mosaic. And the man who was with him reached out to touch the figure of Christ, and it receded under his fingertips.
Oh my goodness.
And he said, the whole mosaic is coming loose from the wall. It is hanging like a veil.
Wow.
So they arrived there in the nick of time, and they got syringes and a kind of a glue, and they went over inch by inch, gluing the tiles back into place again, and preserved that. But it could have just been a pile of multicolored rubble, you know. So thank God arranged for Kurt Weitzman to arrive at that time. Here's
What is the political fate of Sinai? I know 2 or 3 years ago, Orthodox and other pilgrimages would go to Sinai, but the last year or two they have not gone to Sinai.
That's right. I'm not sure what the state of visiting or making a pilgrimage to Sinai is at this time. I know that it was strongly discouraged not too long ago.
We just had a monk from Sinai speaking at St. Ivan, and he said they've always had such a good relationship with the surrounding Arab Muslims. There isn't a problem. They've never had any danger. They've never had any problems. So if you can get close enough.
There's a very, very long-standing good relationship with the Bedouins.
Yeah, they protect.
But I thought that Egypt had prohibited it.
There were some.
Yes, Frederica.
Right now, southern Sinai has become a major hotbed for terrorist organizations. And so while the immediate people surrounding Sinai have always been friends and protectors of Sinai, the jihadis view it as an abomination that they want to wipe off the face of the earth. And so the monastery has been in very grave danger of being destroyed. And so there was just a few weeks ago there was a big international plea to save the monastery because it was being endangered by these jihadis.
Oh, it's been continuously occupied since it was built in 550. And even before that, when Egeria made her travel, she said there are monks all over the Holy Mountain. That the Emperor Justinian just built the monastery to protect them from the Bedouins, who were not that friendly at this point. But as the oldest continuously operated monastery in the world, now they're faced, as you say, with jihadists who have their goal of destroying it. Yeah.
Despite the fact that there's a covenant of protection written and signed by Muhammad himself.
Yes, I'd forgotten that. Yes.
They have.
That's it. I had forgotten that. Yes, Muhammad actually signed a paper saying that Christians would be able to hold this forever, and sealed it with his handprint. So I don't know what they make of that. Maybe they're now saying it's a forgery. They just hate it that it's there, I think. They won't be happy until it's destroyed. How many of our brothers and sisters in the faith saw that happen, my husband and I toured around Turkey, and we saw so many ruined churches, and ruined monasteries, and it's hard to believe that you could live through that. I mean, picture everybody at your church running and hiding in the church when the bad guys are sweeping in, and they lock all the doors and set fire to it. This happened to our brothers and sisters in the faith over and over again. And, for 1,500 years, it's just been a ruin. It was never rebuilt. In Christ, we can go through that kind of a loss and that kind of a humiliation and shame, and still have everything we need from the Lord Himself. Yes.
I'm sure you were going to probably get to it, but I figured it was worth mentioning the burning bush.
Oh, the burning bush is at St. Catherine's. That's right, and that's why the monastery was built there. That it is said to enclose the burning bush. I mean, there's an enormous ancient bush there that is the burning bush. the first time I was looking for a photo of it, I came across some tourist, not even Christian, I think, and it was a nice photo of the burning bush, and it had like a brick retaining wall around it, and leaning up against the retaining wall was a fire extinguisher. I don't know.
I graduated from Liberty University School of Law, and one of our ceremonies, I think in our second years, we had gotten a stone from St. Catherine's Monastery. Each one of us took an oath on that stone. I believe it was on the order of being a good Christian statesman, a good Christian attorney. While you're practicing, we have that stone, last I was there, in a display case in our front lobby.
Well, I didn't know. Well, that's great.
We call that a relic.
Yes.
I'm going to try to pick up the speed a little bit because I have a little ways to go and we need to have lunch in 20 minutes. This is the Christ of Sinai again, the four views that I went through before. And I mentioned that it was modeled somewhat on the portraits of the dead in Egypt, really a good bit earlier, more like the year 1 or the year 100 BC. In the centuries kind of spanning that area, it was the custom to have images or portraits of the dead painted, and then the mummy would be all wrapped up, and the portrait would be on a panel of wood that would be held in place by the wrappings. The last layer would be they put wrappings around it that retained this image right where the face would be. So the place where these are best preserved is a little place in Egypt called Fayum. So they're called the Fayum portraits. This is a young man who died, and you see the eyes, you know. Christians took up this practice after it had actually fallen out of fashion in Egypt to bury people this way. It came from the Greeks, actually. It was not a native Coptic tradition. But you see the plaque of the wood with the face on it very much sounds like our icons. Another, this young woman, again, she just looks so stylish, you know. You always think you could see her on the streets of Paris today. It's tragic to think of death of some people who are so young and so attractive. Looks like a teenage boy, you know. And in this one you can see the straps of cloth that would have wound all the way around the mummy. The face is still being held in place on the mummy. And again, you see the comparison. It's like the Christ of Sinai. The greatest hits, the three greatest hits of iconography would be the Christ of Sinai, the Rublev Trinity. This was painted about 1920. And it was... Did I say 19? I meant 1420. I was just seeing it going away. That was a test.
Yes.
The predecessor for this image is called the Hospitality of Abraham, and it would show Abraham and Sarah kind of leaning in, holding food or holding platters. The Hospitality of Abraham to the three men or the three angels who came to visit him. And because the monastery where St. Andrew Rublev was a monk was Holy Trinity, and his spiritual father, the great St. Sergius, had recently died. He painted this image to go above his tomb, removed Abraham and Sarah to make it an image of the Trinity. It was sort of a new idea to present this as the Trinity. You see the Oak of Mamre in the background. Apparently this is an altar. It's got the niche in the stone where the relics would be placed. A chalice. If you're Orthodox, you know, but before I was Orthodox, I didn't know. We receive communion from the chalice. The consecrated bread is placed in the chalice, and we receive communion on a spoon. So this looks like it's a chalice containing the wine and bread mixed together. And you can see there, he's fooled with the perspective a little bit, so that it looks like we're looking down at quite an angle at the foot platform. But then about the time you reach their shoulders and faces, we're right on that level or just below, looking up at them a little bit. This gives you the feeling that the whole icon is leaning toward you. It's like it's sort of pressing in on you. This is often, not every single time, but it's often done in icons. That perspective has been played with to make you feel a little bit off balance, or even reversed, so that the vanishing point, instead of being, you know, where the train tracks come together, as we learned in elementary school, far in the frame of the picture, instead of that, you're standing on the vanishing point. It's ballooning out toward you, and you just feel, it's like feeling the energies of God pressing in on you. So a number of different wonderful things he did here. But of books that get put on the front of icons that get put on the fronts of Christian books, probably Christ of Sinai is one, Old Testament Trinity is two. This would be the third most popular of icons. This is the Virgin of Vladimir. The story is that it was actually painted by St. Luke when he went to interview her. St. Luke's Gospel contains things that Mary alone would have known, like the Annunciation. Nobody else was there. Only Mary could have told that story. It has details like she pondered these things in her heart. That would be something, you think about Mary would have been about 80, and Luke was this young man who's dynamic, he's a wonderful writer, he's a physician, he has all these skills, probably multilingual, and he's writing it down, and she's saying, I really had to think about that after that happened, after the angel left me. I really had to ponder that in my heart for a while. So the story is that he painted her portrait on the kitchen table, and that this is that picture. There are actually a number of ancient images of the Virgin Mary that are attributed to St. Luke. It's a lovely story, and that's all I'm going to say about that. And people who are a lot holier than I am have believed that story, so I have nothing to say about it. This comes into history, though, about the year 1131. So that's when we first start hearing about it. Here's I forgot I had this in here. Anybody recognize this? This is Mel Gibson's movie production company, Icon Productions, and it is actually, it's the eye of the Virgin of Vladimir, although if you look very closely at the real one, this has a lot more cracks in it. It's like they max factored the Virgin Mary. They thought this will look much better, has more cracks and in different places, so they made it look a lot more cracky and ancient. Here's St. Luke painting the Virgin Mary. 3 examples of the Madonna and Child image.
What year was this one?
This one here, I think I said this one is about 200.
Yeah.
Yeah, about, it's from the Catacomb of Priscilla, and I have here about 250.
Priscilla, where is that?
Catacomb of Priscilla in Rome. It's one of the ancient catacombs there in Rome. You can see there's, about 250 AD. We see this about 1100, and then 2000. You see how the basic form and placement of the people really hasn't changed that much over 2,000 years. It's the same principle of design in time. There are 3 different kinds of icons in the Theotokos, and I'll go back and show you this. If they're pressing their faces together, it's called tenderness. Sometimes a variation is called sweet kissing. They're kissing each other, so he's kissing her so sweetly. There are variations where this very, very close up, this is Kazan, isn't it? This is the pattern of the Kazan icon. There are others where you see the whole figure of the child, and in some he's run to his mother so fast one of his sandals is hanging loose. There's some very beautiful, beautiful variations of the Virgin of Tenderness. The second one that we mostly see is the directress, she who shows the way. So she's gesturing to the Christ. They're not pressed and cuddling like they are in the other version. Gesturing toward him, he's sitting up and giving a blessing here. Directress is the second style. And this icon here, this is so powerful. Let's see if I've got a date on this. I don't have a date on this. I think this is 11th century. It's very arresting. When I first saw this icon, it was at, I think, 1989 or 1990 at an exhibition of ancient Greek icons in Baltimore. And it's huge. This is a processional icon. It's painted on both sides. You can kind of see at the bottom there's a little place where a pole would be inserted to hold it up. And it's enormous, so it's as big as a door. And as I was walking into the exhibit, this was sort of set blocking the path. So you walk right up to this and then went around it. And I kept thinking about, where have I seen those eyes before? Remember this? Yeah. This Afghan refugee from 1985. Just so much in those eyes, so much sorrow and fear, and just kind of ducking her head down, and her hand, I mean, this is directress, she's gesturing toward him, but it almost seems like her hand is falling. It's just a heartbreaking image. I thought this was so powerful. So I went past it and I looked back on the other side. And this is the image on the other side. This says above, the King of Glory. This is the King of Glory. That is what we Christians say. That the crucified Christ, who had been mocked and shamed, that he is our King of Glory. The paradox of that was just so beautiful. I turned to look at that, and I had one of those spiritual experiences where I felt like I was not being permitted to leave. I had to just stand there and keep looking at it, and I thought, other people think I'm crazy, Lord, can I go now? Why am I still standing here? But it must have been 20 minutes. I just stood there and just looked and looked and looked and looked at this image. And when I walked into the exhibit, I didn't really like icons. I thought it was like not good art, and they just don't really know how to paint people, and they're just not very friendly. Because remember what worship is? La, 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 la. What's wrong with these people? But after I finished looking at this icon for 20 minutes, I got icons. It really made a big change in me. That was the time God appointed, anyway. Very powerful. The third time of icons. Of icons of the Theotokos is the Virgin of the Sign. Isaiah 7 says, "Behold, I give you a sign, a virgin will conceive and bear a child." So here she is. This is meant to be the pregnant Theotokos, and on the disc you can see into her womb, and you see the Christ child kind of ruling as the King of the universe from eternity.
Yes, it's like our icon made without hands, Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is the Blessed Mother as figured as the woman in Revelation chapter 12 on top of the serpent. The unborn child Jesus is inside her womb. Suppose the story goes that the Aztec peasant boy Juan Diego he saw the Blessed Mother in the desert, and she had asked him to go tell the bishop of Mexico City or wherever it was to build a church on that spot. So he goes over to the bishop, and he's not sure exactly who he sees. The story says that he unfolds his cloak, they call it a tilma, and pour out these yellow roses. And there's a picture of the Blessed Mother on the tilma. I've seen a copy of it at one of our parishes in Clarksville, Virginia. And it's very beautiful. And it's also said that inside the eye of the Blessed Mother are 3 individuals. And I suppose, although it's a Catholic icon, it has a lot of similarities to the Orthodox icons you're showing us, particularly this one.
Yeah, that's an astounding image. It really is. And I know that Vladika has a particular devotion to that icon. It's one particularly close to him. And you're right, it's a miraculous, not made by hands image on a tilma, which is a kind of it's a robe or a cloak just woven out of fibers. They disintegrate in 20 years. So what's this, 400 years later, it's still intact. It still has this miraculous image on it. And I just saw a video about this. It showed how in her eye you see the reflection of the bishop and Juan Diego, and it's like you can identify, 3 or 4 little people that are being reflected as they're looking at this image. But I didn't know it had the Christ child in it, so that is a connection to the Virgin of the Sign. Of course, the woman clothed in the sun is bearing a son. Here's another Oran's figure. I think it's the same one we saw earlier from the catacombs. Here's the one I was talking about, where Christ is depicted, maybe seated on her lap, but usually when it's the hands lifted in prayer like this, this is meant to be the Virgin of the Sign. All of our conventions for the language of icons obviously came together over a period of centuries and centuries and centuries. So the very early ones might not match the way we think it ought to be. Something I could have pointed out about the Transfiguration, up above the arch, the huge mosaic, up above the arch, there's Christ in the middle, and the Theotokos and St. John the Baptist, the forerunner, on either side. Very classic Orthodox way of setting up those 3 figures, the 2 on either side, looking toward Christ in prayer, called a deesis. The thing is, in Sinai, they're reversed. The Theotokos is supposed to be on the Lord's right and John the Baptist on his left. But it was so early; those conventions hadn't all been established, and they're reversed on that particular image.
One thing that strikes, if you go to the Women in the Arts Museum and look at the Mary exhibit, all of the Renaissance Marys, she looks very Mediterranean there.
She does.
Whereas, of course, in the exhibit, they're all
very
they're all
aquiline noses.
Florentine noble ladies,
We want to compliment her by making her look beautiful, whatever our standards are. Let's see, this is, of course, another Virgin of the Sign. This is, I think this is the one I mean, 1200 in Kiev. And here's a new image of St. Elizabeth and the Theotokos greeting each other, the visitation. There's a large image of this that is carried in the March for Life, and we just saw that a couple of days ago in Washington. It's a nice one. Trying to cram everything before noon. Maybe we can go 5 minutes after noon.
Yeah, you can go a little.
These are two images of the crucifixion, and the first one, the one that's clearly an icon, and I'm sorry the resolution is so poor. The one that's the icon was painted by Emmanuel Lombardos of Crete about 1620. The second one was painted about 1625 by the Dutch painter Hendrik ter Brueggen, Hendrik from Bruges. And you can see quite a distinction there. I wrote an article about this when The Passion of the Christ came out in 2004. And so many people were saying earlier depictions of Christ didn't show the crucifixion in a very graphic way. But there was when the Black Death came along, it made people realize, and put images in their mind that were a lot more extreme and more painful in depicting suffering. So that's why they began making the images more bloody after that time. And in my article I was saying, I don't think that's so. I think that Christians in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century had plenty of opportunity to observe grisly forms of death. But they wanted Christ to be honored on the cross. And the anecdote that I made up, I'm not sure this really works, but maybe to a certain extent. I said, imagine that there's some teenagers at a party and one of them dares another one. They decide they're going to go to the bad section of town and just for fun pretend they want to buy some drugs. So they do this, but the guy said, he looks at them and he sees, these are really preppy kids, look at the earrings. I can get a lot more out of their parents if I kidnap them. So he coaxes them, come back to my place, and then he locks them in, and he contacts the parents and says, $1 million or whatever. And so the chief of police calls his men together and says, we need somebody who will go into that apartment, who will knock the door down and hold the bad guys back until all the captives run free. But you might be captured. If you volunteer for this, you might suffer, you might die trying to set those people free. And one of the young men says, I will do this, I volunteer for this. Maybe he even says, I want to offer this to the honor of the chief of police, who's been like a father to me. And, whatever I do, it's from what I learned from you. And but my will is your will, and I want to do whatever you want to do. So that's exactly what happens, that he goes, breaks the doors down, all the captives run free, and but he gets captured and he gets tortured. And then I get in a problem, because if I say he dies, I can't make him come back to life. So we're just going to avoid that part of the analogy. So think about how those parents and how those townspeople feel about the officer who died. He set them free by his blood, right? He paid for their lives with his life. Somebody who didn't speak English very well would say, oh, do you mean it was like a bargain? Like the kidnapper said, if you give me a quart of blood, I'll let them go. No, it wasn't like a trade. It's just he paid it, but it wasn't like a deal he made. He didn't give the blood to the chief of police either. That wouldn't make any sense. It's just that's what it cost him. So they admire what this man does. They want to build a monument to him. They want to name a building after him. They've built him a beautiful tomb, and they remember him with a very urgent love in their hearts. Movie producer comes to town and says, I want to make a movie about this story. It's such a great story. And the townspeople go, that's so great, because totally that's what he deserves. And the movie maker says, yeah, and the best part is when he was being tortured. So I want like an hour and 20 minutes of the movie. It's just going to be torture scenes. You know, that's what we need to see. And they would say, oh, that's so horrible. It's just gross. Why focus on that? Well, that's what it cost. We can't really value the gift and sacrifice he made unless we see every detail of how much it hurt. I think we understand why the townspeople would feel instinctively that would be a hideous thing to do, and that it is appropriate for us not to pry into the details of a hero's suffering. We may admire him particularly because he suffered, but it's like you want to draw the veil. You turn your face away. It's not right to look at him at his moment of greatest humiliation. You want to see him as the conqueror, as the vanquisher, the victor. And that's what we see in icons, and have from the beginning, and always will. It always shows Christ reigning from the cross as if he's on a throne. He looks strong. It's almost like he's holding the cross up. He's not sagging from the cross. It was a little better resolution. You would see that the angels are turning their faces away. They can't bear to see them. That's sort of the example for us. We don't want to see every detail or every drop of blood. The Dutch version on the other side, you see it's much more anatomically accurate. Some of the artists at that time would actually get bodies of dead people. They would get corpses and nail the corpse to a cross so they could paint it with exacting accuracy, paint it exactly right. Look at the articulation of the knee and the calf there. He knows a lot about anatomy, and he may have done it from actually looking at a corpse hanging from the cross. I think we understand instinctively why it's better not to pry into those details and to treat the Lord's victory with some restraint. Here's the Christ of Sinai. This is this is the resurrection Christ from the Church of Cora right outside Constantinople, painted about 1320. And it ties in with what I'm saying, because this is the next scene after the crucifixion. That he goes from that glorious golden cross where he is triumphant, where he's the conqueror, into the realm of Hades, where he begins setting the captives free in hell. That he's drawing Eve and Adam up out of their tombs, holding them not by the hand, but by the wrist, because all of the energy flows from him. They're just flying up out of the tombs as he draws them up, coming back into life, restoring them to life. Standing behind Eve is her son Abel. Remember, he was the herder of sheep. He's got a shepherd's crook with him. Over behind Adam, we see King David, Solomon, John the Baptist. It's all the righteous dead of all eternity are being brought back into life by Christ's conquering act. The gates, the apartment door, the gates of hell are broken down beneath his feet. In that black abyss below him, we see chains, locks, instruments of torture, lots of metallic things. And you can't quite see because of the glare, but lying prostrate underneath the broken doors is the evil one who has been wrapped up in his own chains. This is our goal. This is our destiny. This is the destiny we're called to. It's where Christ is taking us, is ultimately to resurrection. Look at how many people are around him, and Adam and Eve on either side, but he's looking at you. He's looking out at us and saying, you're next. Get ready. This is for you too. So this is, again, one of the most popular icons, and a very beautiful one. Sometimes icons get defaced. These are all from, this one's from Gorem in Turkey. It's an 11th century icon. And usually they will scratch out the eyes or scratch out the face. Sometimes they're afraid of the eyes. They think there's power in the eyes. So here's, as much as our Lord suffered, as much as his crucifixion was just so much for him to willingly take on, the image of his crucifixion can then be insulted and degraded and defaced, as we see here. Another one where the faces have been scratched off because of the threat. Because of the threat they seem to hold or perceived to hold to those who fear the cross. Another one with the faces gone. We can look at these beautiful works of art and be transported by the beauty, but it's good to remember that just as that very first crucifixion was a mockery of the crucifixion, So these we see here at the end of this series are, we offer the most beautiful thing we have. We offer this beautiful portrait of our Lord and his mother and his friend John grieving beside it. And people will still go and scratch the faces out. There's that much antagonism to our Lord. When we sign up to be a Christian, we put ourselves in for possibly the same kind of treatment. We can't expect that we'll be successful in this life. We can't expect that what we're trying to do will even be understood. We may be hated precisely because we are Christians, precisely because of what we stand for. And we're not necessarily going to be vindicated again in this life. And I went through Turkey, and so many destroyed monasteries and churches. But those were churches and monasteries that hadn't been rebuilt again better than ever. They were still just in ruins. Our expectations of what our life will be like in Christ, we need to know that it might well mean some suffering, but it also means glory. It also means glory on the other side. Finally, it's a beautiful painting. It looks like 20th century. I'm not sure how old it is. Icons are meant to be used. Icons are meant to be with us in a relationship. We're engaging with the icons. We're praying. We don't pray to an icon, but you pray in the presence of an icon. If you had your favorite grandmother and you kept her photo, and when you saw it, you might think, oh, Granny, I know you're in heaven, say a prayer for me. You wouldn't necessarily be talking to the photograph, but it kind of sparks that, oh, you feel her draw near again, man, wish you were here. I think that's the way that we engage with icons, is seeing it as someone that we love, and we just feel closer to them in the presence of that image. It's a nice painting, because although it's not too easy to see, but this woman is pregnant as she stands there in front of the Theotokos, reading prayers, maybe prayers for a pregnant woman or for a child, and her little boy in his blue jacket is sitting on the bench back behind her. Well, that's how it ends. Icons are not just artworks. Icons are meant to be in relationship with us, and to help us and to add more color, depth, and beauty to our life in Christ. Thank you. Thanks so much.